Hello, and welcome to the first of what is hopefully going to be a number of poetry readings. My own poems. I shall read the poem, and then for those that are interested, delve into some of the key aspects of the poem, the structure, the language, some of the key themes. The text of the poem itself is down in the description for those of you that are visual people and would like to read along as you listen along. But without further ado, here is the poem. Creative Spark. I admire the fire that I have contrived, anxious yet pleased that this night has arrived. I gather the notebooks and, uttering my thanks, cast into the bonfire a life's worth of angst, birthed long ago by a creative spark and destroyed by another that lights up the dark. The fire lashes out, tongues tasting my rhymes, licking at pages of handwritten lines, their order dissolving, obscured by the haze. Versatile verses succumb to the blaze, growing and building, now roaring and soaring, gorging itself on my naked outpourings. Stanzas and stanzas of novelty burning, reducing to ashes my poetic yearnings. Sonnets and cinquains, haikus and odes, creative destruction, the two juxtaposed. Onwards and upwards the inferno rages, eating its way through the hundreds of pages of word-conjured images, engulfed by fire, my muse sacrificed on this poetry pyre. Time passes, the fire dies, yet as the smoke clears, revealing the ashes of all my ideas, my eyes become drawn to a last lonely ember, seemingly trying its best to remember poetry birthed by a creative spark, reduced to another that now becomes dark. If you have had a look at the text in the description, you can see that it is divided into three sections. The prologue, the main action itself, and then an epilogue. The prologue, as prologues do, just setting the scene. The main action itself, showing the building of the fire, the intensity, the language starts to speed up a little, and then the slowness of the epilogue as we trail off. Not a lot more to say about the structure really than that. I did want to set the scene to show, this was a creation of the bonfire. This is a ritualistic thing. And the epilogue, of course, just to take stock of the fact that all of this creation has been destroyed, and we'll return to that in a moment when we look at the themes. The language itself, the rhyme scheme is fairly typical rhyming couplets. Nothing much to note there really. I guess the main aspect of the language here is the description of the fire in the main section of the poem. It's the personification or anthropomorphization, if you will, of the fire itself. It's a hungry fire, a greedy fire. It wants me to feed it, licking, tasting, gorging. The act of creation itself is something that artists describe as feeding them, as fueling them. It is also a venting process, of course, but it is something that a lot of people see as a way to feed their muse. And we'll return to the muse later, of course, the point at which the muse is sacrificed. The key themes really are creation and destruction. It is said in one line of the poem, creative destruction, the two juxtaposed. Art, of course, is an act of creation. Whether a poet, a painter, a novelist, musician, the artist is creating something, manifesting something, bringing something into the world that didn't exist before. Fire, of course, is very infamous almost for being a destructive force. So the idea here of taking the act of creation and coupling it with the act of destruction, of burning works of art, burning poetry, notebooks here, hundreds of pages of word-conjured images. This is a life's worth of art that's been stocked up here and cast into the fire. Creation being destroyed. The juxtaposition of those two things is hopefully a powerful image. It's always quite interesting when I think about the creation of a piece of art, again in whatever form, as to whether or not it is creation or the discovery. I know some people, and sometimes this applies to myself, see themselves as tapping into something, as discovering something more so than creating it. I know when one of my own poems comes out and is structured and falls together, if you like, in just the right manner, just what I was looking for, it feels like I've uncovered something as opposed to created it. And there can be a lot of frustration that goes hand in hand with that act of creation, when you feel like you're not quite getting there, you're not quite seeing what is attempting to reveal itself to you, if you like. The other aspect of that, though, of course, is once that poem, whatever work of art is brought into existence, will it ever go away? The burning of these notebooks of poetry here is, of course, meant to symbolise that very thing. It is the destruction of those works of art. But once they are created, once they have an existence of their own, once they're manifest in the world, it could be argued that they will continue to exist, especially if the poetry has been shared. A poem that exists solely in the mind of the poet, maybe not so, but once it's been shared, whether in written form or orally, it exists then in the mind of the audience, in the mind of the person that's received the poem. And destroying the notebooks won't therefore destroy the poem. The poem has a life of its own almost, which isn't extinguished, even if you extinguish a particular format that the poem is displayed in, like a notebook. There's a ritualistic aspect to this. There is a sacrifice here. I mentioned the muse earlier. Many artists talk about their muse, their inspiration. And what we see here is this poet sacrificing their muse. My muse sacrificed on this poetry pyre. It is not just a fire, it's a pyre. It's a very religious, as I say, ritualistic thing. The building of this fire, not for heat, not for light, but for ritual, for sacrifice. The muse is being destroyed along with the poems here. We have a sense of a poet that's come to the end of their work, possibly the end of their life, and they're looking back at all the things that they've created, and for whatever reason, it's open to interpretation, they seek to destroy it, to bring an end to their creation, to their creations, and their creativity itself, in a sense. The sacrifice of the muse. There is, in the last section, of course, this slowing down. As time passes, the fire dies, the smoke is clearing, and all that's left in this last little section that draws the eye is a last lonely ember. All that remains of these notebooks, all that remains of the poems, possibly not, again, if they've been shared, but certainly this ember in the poem is seen as a sign of an attempt to hold on to this creativity, to hold on to the poems, this last little shred, this last little iota of creativity, of what used to be hundreds of pages, thousands of words, created and now destroyed, but lingering, trying to keep a hold of this creativity. In the first section, we see that the poems are birthed by a creative spark and destroyed by another that lights up the dark. And in the very last lines, we see again poetry birthed by a creative spark, reduced to another that now becomes dark. So there is the theme of light and dark again running throughout this. The light of the fire being the most obvious, of course. But the ember itself is a little spark, as I say, desperately trying to hold on to this creativity. But in the absence of fuel to support it, again, it cools, it darkens, and it disappears. Which is what I shall do right now. Thank you for listening.